Welcome to the fifth Clarifying Thought podcast, broadcast on Twitch Mondays and Fridays and posted to YouTube. We're your hosts, Mike and Dave. For our podcast today, we'll be discussing the fascinating and elusive topic of meme. The idea of a meme was first addressed by Richard Dawkins in his book The Selfish Gene, and given further clarification in Daniel Dennett's Bacteria to Bach and Back, which we'll start off our discussion with today with the hope of producing clear foundations for understanding of what a meme is, before we tackle the multiplicity of occurrences of memes on the internet. For Dennett, memes are a feature of the manifest image. So, what is the manifest image? The manifest image is the things that we use in our daily lives to anchor our interactions and conversation, and to a rough approximation, for every noun in our everyday speech, there is a kind of thing that it refers to. That's the sense in which the image is manifest. It is obvious to all, and everybody knows that it is obvious. And everybody knows that, too. It comes along with your native language. It's the world according to end. Inasmuch as the contents and activities of the manifest image are obvious to everyone, that obvious information is carried in the meme structure that is sufficient to be dispersed and replicated without the understanding of those using it. For this reason, words are the simplest memes that we encounter regularly across all cultures. But what kind of memes are words? If the memes that we are used to considering little images with text more resemble political cartoons than something as simple as a word. In fact, the multiplicity of facets that manifest in internet memes show us that not only can memes be the type of things that are pronounced, like words, but they can also be the types of things that are drawn, performed, and compounded. Memes are way-making for us, and that the foundation of information that they engender is sufficient to guide us towards the proper behaviors without our needing to be explicitly told what they are, like a baby discerning that the square is mean for bumping the triangle. In this way, memes are transmitted as an aspect of the manifesto. They produce the ground for the pre-symbolic and symbolic applications of one's experiences with the world. They are those things that produce the items of the categories and determine what categories are. David?
Well, I think that's a great synopsis of the first part of what Dennett is saying in his book on memes, or his book on the evolution of concepts and how concepts themselves begin to interact with biology. Um, yeah, I think what's interesting about them is that these little pieces of information have a life of their own. And since they require no comprehension or competence, their authorship is completely ambiguous. And they also have this reproductive fitness. So, like a virus, they can replicate simply because the memes themselves are advantageous enough for themselves to reproduce, like a boat traveling on the water is sufficient. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Like then it says the ocean is more the thing that crafts the boats than the artisans that craft the boats themselves because
Mm-hmm.
they're just working within a medium of wood and this external pressure on the boats, which is the ocean or the lake or whatever, the battle even maybe that it encounters. And that pressure is what then feeds back into the system. So memes act like this because they're what Dennett calls prescriptions for ways of doing things that can be transmitted, stored, and mutated without being executed or expressed. So the concept themselves isn't necessarily related to an concrete set of behaviors that can be elucidated or like talked about by the people who are doing them. Like the boat maker may not necessarily know the reasons for every specific activity that he's doing. So memes ground the naive picture of the world that we inherit from our culture, our life, and our family, and then it then uses this Oxford English Dictionary, which I feel is somewhat circular because I feel like it's just a synopsis of his definition that he gives probably in this text, or through a combination of his works, as an element of culture that may be considered to be passed on by non-genetic means. So essentially, the the definition is extremely broad in that it can be any subset of information that is transmitted from one being to another within a culture, even though our definition of, I mean, culture and transmission is not super well borne out in this specific instance.
It's it raises the question of what the basic unit, what's the difference between a meme and collection.
A meme in a collection of memes?
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. At what point does something stop being a single meme and start being several memes put together?
Well, I think I mean, given the definition that we've been provided in the chapter where he talks about memes, the simplest form of meme that we can refer to that's cross cultural, that isn't something that is like a gesture. I mean, words we can, I think, all agree are extremely universal, um, and they represent probably the most simple particular that we can find. Maybe that's not true.
Well,
Can we start there at least?
with words as a specific subset of memes.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
As like
And
as a perfectly simple meme. Something that's like
yeah,
an elemental meme maybe, or something that doesn't
elemental.
something that doesn't have any compoundness to it, something that hasn't been additively created, or
So a
is
simple word,
or a
a
simple meme,
non-compound.
a
Yeah,
non-compound, like I don't know
because
which
some
words we
words
would
are
choose.
compound.
Right,
Um,
right, right. I was thinking about that. Like there are some Sanskrit words that are like multiple compounds.
and then you've got prefixes. Actually, prefixes and suffixes are a good place to start because they don't have uh, specific conceptual denotations. They
Mhm.
modify something like past tense. The idea of something being past tense as opposed to present tense
In Sanskrit, they have
could be
roots.
construed as a meme.
The roots are all the roots would be considered the most foundational elements of the language, and everything else is just rules that are added onto those, which I don't think we have in English, but
Oh
uh,
well,
there are.
Sanskrit is the most aggressively normal language in existence, and English is the most aggressively abnormal
Sure.
language in existence.
So I think that there are definitely like etymologies within the language that would suggest that there are these perfectly simple concepts within words or that construct words, like phonemes or however you want to put it. Maybe phonemes are probably the most simple meme.
Phonemes that have some sort of content associated.
Well, but that's what's interesting about that is that's not necessary, right? The phoneme itself, it doesn't have to be obvious to the users or comprehended by them what the meaning is, right? Because the way I think about this is that the phonemes themselves are completely meaningless, right? Yet
Yeah,
somehow they're used, and insofar as that they're meaningless, when they're then aggregated into these words, they become meaningful memes. Maybe.
yeah, they become carriers of meaning.
Maybe they become right. The meme has found it's the phonemes have found them a way to organize themselves, right?
Yeah, phonemes are vehicles.
Phonemes are vehicles, right? For
because we
the
can
for the construction of meaning.
because we can speak right now, and take the word speak for speech. Uh, it has a sound. It's a particular collection of phonemes. Written out, the written series of squiggles has nothing to do with the sounds. They're arbitrary symbols, and you could write speech in several different alphabets or
Right.
syllables.
Yeah, we
Uh,
could use Devanagari instead.
yeah, so there's a connection, there's a semantic connection between the written word and the spoken word, and that I think is where the meme resides. It's not the written word or the spoken word, but it's what unifies both of them as effectively the same word, if that makes sense.
Well, that would be what some call sense, which is the concept that there's this idea that I think this is Badu's idea that sense is this amorphous shape that takes on the properties of translation. It allows for the movement of concepts between different realms of access. Uh, and I mean, you just does that make sense? Right at the end, well, what does that mean?
Absolutely.
What does that mean, right? I mean,
I think
it is a serious question. And to me, what that means when you say, "Does that make sense?" When you ask that question, when anybody asks the question, "Does that make sense?" What they're asking is, does the the language, do the phonemes that I've just used translate through this abstract process that we call meaning and language, right? In into your brain, right? In a way that produces outcomes that I desire, right?
yes,
And
and
then do you have a respective understanding that that is what I've meant in saying that?
yes, and I think the leap to defining it in terms of evolution and natural selection is if it makes sense and if you can successfully transmit it to me, and if that then inspires me to continue copying it into other brains. Like
Right.
Badu may have come up with this argument, this concept, and now it's been transmitted to you and lots of other people. And I'm assuming he came up with it in French, so it's been translated,
Oh yeah.
transmitted to you, transmitted to me. I can keep running with it. Now, the one part, and it's not that it doesn't make sense, but if he's describing it as amorphous, sense
Yeah.
as being the same morphic,
I don't
I
know
would
if he
I
ever
would
actually says that specifically, but that you
sure.
definitely get the idea that it has this topology that is undefined,
And that's the key: is undefined, poorly defined. The
loose,
goal, mhm.
can take on
Dennett's
any
goal,
shape, right? Because it
great,
produces the
yeah.
sense. So it means one. It can take on the shape that produces meaning for one person, and it can take on a shape that produces meaning for another person. But those meanings are
Mm.
identical, but the shape is different.
Or occasionally those meanings are different,
Occasionally they are
even
different,
if you
but
say it the same.
with sense specifically, we're talking about translation, right? Like how it
Right.
is that like does am I able to move meaning from myself to you, or right, or like in the common idiom here, like what Dennett's talking about with at least the pre-symbolic memes is the memes that produce the expected outcomes of the manifest image.
Yeah. My favorite example is the Neanderthal spear. Had about 30 steps in its production that involved boiling sinew and knapping flint and carving wood in a particular way and then wrapping it. And like they used sinew as glue, they'd effectively invented glue. And there's this complex process to produce a very effective spear that had to be transmitted, had to be taught from one generation to the next. And it lasted many, many generations because they found the same spear. They found archaeological evidence of the same style, as it were, the same spear meme across dozens of generations at least. So there's this it's clearly demonstrated that they were transmitting it from one generation to the next. It was not a complex process that was simply rediscovered over and over again. So yeah, the transmission is key, and it harkens back to last time with signal and noise and error correction. Were we talking about that?
Yeah, we did. Speaking
Mm.
of, do you have a fan on right now?
No, it's
Oh,
probably just.
okay. Sometimes you're cutting out just a little bit there.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
It's fine. What were you gonna say?
I think I saw it.
Okay.
Effective transmission seems to be the basic root of the concept. Effective transmission and making copies of itself.
Right.
That's what separates
But
a
what's
meme from.
but what's important, I think, is that the people who are using it don't need to know why it's working. Right? Like the fact that we have this evidence of people creating glue is evidence for the transmission of memes, right? Through like some type of complex like artisan process or apprenticeship process, right? Or like family process, because making glue through that many steps, from my understanding, is pretty complicated. And like, it wouldn't have been something that one just randomly came to experience, right? Like, there would have to have been some type of feedback, probably from cooking at some point in time, or like maybe a happy accident where the information was right where they like went to eat it and they realized like, oh, this isn't edible. This is like right, this is glue, or they let it sit out or something. I don't actually know the process to make the
Up to
glue,
something.
but it was
Me
mostly,
neither.
I mean, it was likely, at least initially, some of the steps were accidental. It's possible that that's maybe not true and that they really were aiming for this, or that they saw some of these properties occur naturally
Yeah,
and
accidental, at the very least, observed. It
observed
would have to be
accidentally.
observed before it
Right.
would
And that's what
be.
I mean by accidental. I mean that the process that produced them wasn't intentionally manifested before the accidental outcome, which is like stickiness or some next step in the process, was discovered.
Mhm.
Now, I mean, anybody who's ever built anything themselves, though, from scratch or tried to figure out something new, there's always these, I guess, other memes that one relies on, right? Uh, and we were probably cooking things long before we were using glue. And it's likely to me or possible to me that someone tried to cook something and it didn't it didn't turn out so well. And that may and that may have been the beginning of glue.
Yeah, go to lift up the stirring stick and it's attached to the bottom of the pot.
And
Like,
there,
oh,
yeah,
I got a club now.
right, yeah, and
So
and
yeah,
that outcome is then you, and then what's interesting is that the human beings have this Homo sapiens, Homo techno, however you want to look at them. And once they're starting to use glue, however you want to delineate that, I know that Homo sapien
sapiens.
is the common
It's a sapient
Homo sapien
activity.
sapien. Maybe I think that's when we become Homo sapien sapien. Maybe I don't know. Anyway,
No, these were Homo sapiens Neanderthals who were doing it.
oh, Neanderthals.
Yeah,
Oh, right, that's what you said originally. Well, that's even more fascinating,
right.
right? And
But then
maybe
it goes
that's a
back to
meme that was stolen from other human beings, from Homo sapiens, because we know that they lived simultaneously.
we know that there
Or
are
maybe we stole it from them.
there's mimetic transmission amongst contemporary chimpanzees. Like they're tool users.
Right,
They're effectively in the Stone Age at this point,
right.
their own Paleolithic age, and they use tools. And there's also methodologies. There's a classic story of monkeys that wash their fruit on a particular island. They wash the sand off of the fruit in the ocean, and at first one figures this out, and then a bunch more figure it out, and they all start doing it. And then some on another island start doing it too. And there's this incredible, it's the whole 100 monkeys theorem. Once you get a critical mass of individuals performing a particular activity, ritualistically, they all start doing it. But you can even go all the way, but my favorite example that Dennett uses is the termite, and how they can produce something with absolutely no conception of what they're doing or why they're doing it, that has features like air conditioning.
Right.
The image of the termite mounds, I think one of the reasons that the termite mounds have that those unique features is for airflow, to maximize airflow efficiency in relation to, I guess, space.
But what's interesting is they do this because and don't know why.
They can't know.
They
They
can't
don't
know why. Yeah,
know.
that's a better way of saying it. They can't even know why they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the question here is, what do you think about this argument that Dennett then brings up that um, the theory of meme evolution by natural selection can provide the needed mechanism, just as plate tectonics provided the needed mechanism for the hypothesis of continental drift to be taken seriously in relationship to functionalism. So, do you think that memes can provide um, the mechanism that of action that functionalism needs to get off the ground?
For what? The mechanism of action for what?
For
Like
functionalism.
what's oh, because he was
Because it says, like, for
say
example, old fashioned Durkheimian functionalism, for instance, uncovered
what
many
page is this?
highly. I don't have any pages on my book.
I see. Um,
It's right.
but was able to explain how these effective arrangements came into existence.
Yeah.
212.
Yep.
You don't get teleology for free. That goes back to feeling functionalism.
Right. And that's
Um,
what's really interesting, I think, about this part of the text is that it ties into what we were talking about last week with teleofunctionalism, where it's like, well, why is it that the brain is, has a purpose in its function at all, right? And the, as this text says, functionalism died out for lack of a credible mechanism, and memes seem to be a somewhat credible mechanism, although they have this epiphenomenality to them, in that they exist in the same way that the butterfly's wings exist, like in the spots on the butterfly's wings. These
hmm.
are epiphenomenal. I mean, he even specifically states that in this text. Uh, that the it seems like there's some epiphenomenality to memes that is driving selection somehow, maybe driving selection just for itself, because memes are, competence without comprehension, because memes have their own reproductive fitness, and because memes are informational things.
I think that's the key insight, is that they're maximizing their reproductive fitness, not necessarily the host reproductive
Right, and
fitness.
he says that later on as well, that memes are not good. Memes have seem to have a deleterious effect on the of number and frequency of reproduction. The higher your education, the less likely you are to have any children in great number. Which memes actually make their bearers more likely to have more grandchildren on average? Very few, he says. It seems, and many of the most cherished memes are demonstrably fitness reducing in the biological sense. So it seems that memes are, in some senses, in that they're self-reproducing, they're at least parasitic in the way that viruses are in their reproduction.
Some can be. I think it's important.
Right.
Memes as a whole can be fitness enhancing. They can be fitness reducing, which in and of itself, I think that provides a very good causal explanation for why some humans do things that are so obviously fitness reducing. And the joining cults, joining extremist ideologies, which extremist ideologies are modeled and tracked, like the spread of radicalization can be tracked epidemiologically. Like you can treat carriers as being contagious, and then look at their social network to see how such and such an ideology is being spread, and apply similar mechanisms. And I think that why people would be taken in by ideologies that can get them killed is this is a potential explanation because they're not maximizing their fitness. They're maximizing the fitness of the ideology that is great.
Okay, so I can see how a concept like an ideology of a cult could be could help explain why people become so infatuated and like subservient to the concept, uh, completely disregarding all of their own like needs or future or possible for
Life
possibility for reproduction, their life. The ideology is completely consuming. In as much as they're willing to commit horrible atrocities to serve their ends. Um, I think that's an interesting insight into the types of the ways that memes can be insidious. And I think that if we take that out to a larger macro perspective, if we accept that memes are can be compounded or can be conglomerated or um, can manifest additional structures on top of themselves, like phonemes can become words and words can become sentences and sentences can become beliefs about certain sets of properties about the way the world is.
manifestos.
Manifesto, yeah, sure. They can become manifestos. Uh, it seems to me that whenever we're analyzing any type of information that travels between two different people or within a culture at all, we're referring to at least some level of complexity of this self-replicating idea being this way that information has somehow come to life that infects people and um, furthers its own ends for its own reasons. And maybe like it doesn't, we don't even need to apply life here. And you want to push back on that concept altogether that it doesn't need to be alive. Viruses aren't alive, right? They're like completely mechanical. So,
I think the question of whether or not it's alive is less interesting than the question of when and if it's eventually capable of attaining
from obtaining what?
consciousness.
Consciousness.
If a
So,
sufficiently complex grouping of memes could become solved.
okay. Do you think that we are a sufficiently complicated grouping of memes?
I think that's one way to define the aspect of us that is not genetic. Like the vehicle, if we're talking about a vehicle content description, the content, and this is where it gets, where the metaphysics of the whole thing gets really, content as separate from the vehicle does seem to have a life of its own, if you will.
An
You
emergent
know,
property.
mm,
Yeah.
and I like the going back to the what you were talking about with the insidious nature. I really enjoy the quote at the top from Richardson and Boyd The price we pay for our promiscuous lust for adaptive information is playing host to sometimes spectacularly pathological cultural variants. Yeah, I think we have as with computers, we have hardware that can occasionally get really buggy and not necessarily reflect reality accurately. And that last time we were talking about how that works on an individual level, but those sorts of things can also be transmitted. And once again, the goal is how many religious texts offer some sort of uh, spiritual merit or credit for copying the text and getting other people to believe in the text and in the organization. And so then you get organizations that persist for centuries and centuries, with each individual member of the organization dying and then new ones being born or being converted. And this can be a religion, this can be a political institution, this can be a corporation. Um, they exist, they have more or less stable boundaries, they can grow, they can contract, they take in resources, they produce waste, and seem to have a separate identity from the humans that compose them, and they have behavior. They behave, they compete, they cooperate, they seek out new resources, they evolve, they learn. If are corporations people, legally speaking, yes, but in terms of how we're defining persons, that could be an instance of a sufficiently complicated grouping of memes starting to exhibit some sort of behavior, and thus, if that's how you want to define life, some sort of life.
I think that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about the concept of memes coming together to make a corporation or even a person until just now. But it seems like if we take the functionalist argument, right, and we just accept that memes are information functioning separate from the biological mechanisms that instantiate and allow for their reproduction, it seems that if you have a culture and a culture is sufficient to produce insulated memes that have like specific orientation in the way that their structure exists or relates with the phenomenology of human experience, then yeah, it seems like memes answer a lot of the questions that one has about like, well, what's what's performing these tasks that need to be done in order for, this thought to get any traction, or why is it that we do what we do at all in relationship to our cultural boundaries. But it also in some sense takes away the personal agency of that we have, right? And that we're not really driving the ship so much anymore. And maybe this is why Dennett is seen as anti free will in some sense, even though he will argue that, like, well, just because there's causal aspects that limit my free will doesn't mean I'm anti free will, or doesn't mean that free will doesn't exist. It seems that memes constrain the possibilities of thought, at least a cons- uh, to the extent that they're not necessarily producing adaptive outcomes in human beings. Like they're,
Adaptive,
yeah,
the whole notion of adaptive and adaptive behavior is a constraint on free will. I mean, when Dennett says that memes lower your chances of reproductive success, uh, that doesn't mean they lower your quality of life. Far from it. And getting a college education is gonna reduce the average number of children you have. That doesn't mean it's bad for the individual. All that means by lowering reproductive success is going to have fewer children. So that right there, the notion, oh my, an individual's purpose, such as it is to make more copies of that individual. That's a constraint on free will. An individual can either do that or not do that. And going back to language, with very few exceptions, we don't invent. Like we've received the language that we use. We've received the language that we construct our thoughts. And I think that's more what Dennett gets at with his causal free will notion is simply that I can't. We're not spontaneously just manifesting thought into existence. The thought is mediated by words that already exist, by forms that already exist. Something, even basic things like um, syllogistic logic, syllogistic logic, and affirming the consequent, denying the antecedent, modus ponens, modus tollens. I'm free to make bad arguments. I'm free to affirm the consequent. That doesn't make it more true, though. Like I'm at some point constrained by the fact that one form of thinking is correct and one form of thinking is not correct.
And those are two memes that I think are unfortunately undertaught and understood. Or maybe one meme, depending on how you want to look at it.
That's a good question.
Because one man's modus ponens is another man's modus tollens. So it really just depends on how you want to look at it. Um,
Well,
yeah.
fallacies. Look at fallacies are a great
Fallacies are another
example
great
of
example. Yeah.
really effective, really powerful, wrong or incorrect, false, however you want to phrase it, ideas.
Yeah,
Like you can,
concepts that are frameworks that lead to false concepts.
mhm.
Or
And
yeah, yeah, that's how I would put it.
if you have a mastery of fallacies, you can clarify your thought,
It could be Donald
or
Trump.
you, yeah, or you, and Donald Trump, how much cognizant, like how much intentionality do you think is there as far as his facility with fallacies and with uh, these streams of consciousness that wind up implanting themselves as ideas in people's heads? How much of that is deliberate, and how much of that do you think is a competence without comprehension?
Well, if I take the meme perspective, right? If I take the functionalist meme perspective, then to me, it's Donald Trump is a meme machine, and that he's not even probably thinking. He's so in tune with whatever his memes think the other memes want, that they just run the show, and that
Mm-hmm.
anything that will get a positive outcome from the person in front of him in relationship to what he thinks is a win is what's going to be the thing that he says. So for him, his summum bonum, right? His purpose for existence, the purpose for his memes, is the continuation of his ability to spread more memes.
Yep. Yeah, repopulating himself in brains. They were even crowing about that. A lot of his MAGA cultists. That was a meme in itself. It was Trump is such a good real estate magnate. Look at all of the free real estate that he's occupying in your head without paying rent. Like the idea is to, and I think that's true more generally as far as provocateurs, is to elicit a reaction from people and then make fun of them for having that reaction. You know, oh, you're thinking about X, we win. So that's yeah, it's a great example of fallacies in particular, but using them to copy a really malignant meme.
But it also makes you realize that there are purposes that are beyond the physical purposes, right? There are some circumstances where memes alone are sufficient drivers of activity, where the logical explanation isn't possible or isn't apparent because what's driving the activity is actually these memes,
Such as,
like Donald Trump, the war in Russia. It doesn't there doesn't seem to me or any explanation that I've seen from anybody um, other than like for example um, the reason that's been given why Vladimir Putin is invading Ukraine right now is because he wants to be like Peter the Great and he wants to establish the old Russian Empire, right? Like these types of thinking aren't reasonable at all. There's no logic there at all. it's
oh, it's the
it only makes sense in relationship to a meme or some other concept that is independent of the actual physicality of the world operating on its own in order to make its own self more powerful. And
yeah.
maybe Putin himself is now a meme, but
Oh God, he's been a meme for at least
yeah,
12 years.
at
At
least.
least I remember he had a major, and this was deliberate. He had a major PR campaign about a decade ago. He was doing things like he climbed a mountain in Afghanistan, and they named the mountain after him. Going out hunting tigers with tranquilizer guns and flying he was flying a tanker to drop fire retardant to put out wildfires. Like, he was doing all of these cool, badass things. You remember the photo shoot of him naked, not naked, but shirtless on a horse?
Yeah.
Like, there's so much propaganda putting out Putin as this meme, as this really tough, manly ex
The
KGB
Russian
badass.
meme, the Russian male meme,
Yeah, well, the Russia
the
meme,
Russia
which
meme.
you
Yeah,
see,
sure.
it's he's going for it in this weird I don't even know what that form of government is anymore. It might just be Putinism, Putin capitalism. But prior to that, you had, of course, the Soviet Union, and prior to that, you had the Tsars. And these are all instances of this motherland, which across generations wants other ethnicities, other countries, other regions to be a part of itself, to be within its borders. And yeah, I think one possible explanation for that certainly is mimetic, that the idea of Russia is using these biological instances to perpetuate itself. The other explanation given for war in general is that there's a biological there used to be a fitness enhancing aspect to war in terms of spreading population with soldiers that would be horrendously violent and violent toward the populations that they conquered, with the results of children being born that were at least genetically similar to the conqueror. And that is an explanation proffered for why we like war, why we want to go and put our lives in danger in order to otherwise accomplish very little. Um, there are resource arguments for Ukraine being a major agricultural entity for them producing a lot of food for the region. Just like there were resource arguments for our crusade in the
But
Middle
there,
East.
but there's
And
no. But what's interesting here is that the meme of capitalism isn't winning, right? Like Putin decided to invade the breadbasket of the world instead of trade with the breadbasket of the world,
mm,
right? And that's the only difference here, right? That's why everybody's so upset. The modern world order is not invade, it's trade. If somebody has something you want, you don't take it, you trade for it. And that's the way the modern world order has worked since well, since except for oil, it's been that way. Except for oil, it seems to have been that way since 1945. right? At least in the West, it's been that way. Now, whether you, right, that's why that when they talk about no major world power has invaded, no, right, what they call the New World Order was established after 1945, and roughly we've been working within that framework until now, right? That's one of the reasons that this act is so egregious on Russia's part is that a major power has invaded a a small country that nobody had really any interests in but themselves. Now, obviously, there's other arguments for like, well, what about Vietnam and what what about the what about any country in
All of
South America?
South
What
America.
about any country in South America?
Yeah. No, I think your that premise. First off, that premise itself is a meme.
Well,
Uh,
it
the
may be.
true or false, the whole
Yeah.
neoliberal, peace through trade and mercantile endeavors. And I think that's true as far as it stands. But yes, anytime a country has resisted that, then they've been invaded. It's like, no, we'll trade first. But if you don't want to trade, you're gonna trade anyways.
You're gonna trade. We're gonna take
And
instead of trade. Yeah.
yes, we're going to take. And I mean, that was the logic behind the colonies. The colonies were attempts for Europe to go in and civilize the rest of the world and also extract resources. And it was peaceful because there was because you couldn't really put up a fight, but and the most rational, enlightened way to do things. But yeah, I think that
I think what's
the current
different here with Ukraine and Russia is that when we went into South America, we didn't necessarily invade them. We
no,
we corrupted their governments, installed proxy regimes, and
yeah, we
propped
fomented
up
civil war.
guerrillas.
Hmm. No, we
We didn't.
funded
Yeah.
guerrilla armies to carry out civil wars to change the governments to ones that were going to be more friendly to trade.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and that's what we've been attempting to do with Syria for
And because Russia didn't
eight
do that
years
with
now.
Ukraine, we're upset at them.
Well, Russia tried to do that with Ukraine; it just didn't work. This, you remember the square, not the square, but Winter on Fire. There's a documentary about the Ukrainian Revolution, mass protests that got rid of a corrupt
Hmm.
Ukrainian president
Yeah, I remember that. That
who
was
had been
insane.
effectively. Yeah, it was nuts because he had been bought and installed by Russia, and he prevented Ukraine from joining the eurozone, from joining the European Union, and so the people rose up and threw him out. And then because that didn't work, and for among many other reasons, Russia decided to take an active approach. Part of the issue that Putin's facing,
But we've been
according to
trying to trade with Putin. Sorry to cut you off. Keep going.
we have, sure, we still are.
Yeah,
Like
we
one of
still
the
are trading
reasons
with
the
him.
embargoes weren't and the sanctions weren't really effective is because Russia is a meaningful economic power. Sanctioning them affects the rest of their trading partners too. It's not Iran where the whole point is to cripple their economy and it doesn't have as much of an impact on our economy. But yeah, the natural gas prices in Europe, oil prices, a lot of those are influenced by Russia. And Putin, according to some sources, ran into a similar problem as Trump and other would be dictators in terms of eventually finding himself in an information vacuum where the only memes he was exposed to were memes that he wanted to hear, were things that reinforced his delusions because honesty was punished if it was critical of what he was doing. So, and it's a common failing going throughout history for rulers who don't want to hear the truth, who don't want to be told that, hey, this is a really dumb idea. Only installing yes men and then subsequently being totally detached from reality
Well,
and living in a delusion.
that's an interesting thing to look at in relationship to functionalism and memes, in that the entire function of the when it's in this case, I guess the Kremlin or the upper functions of Russian society is that they're unable to do anything at all, right? Because it seems that memes actually require some negative feedback or some dissonance, because when all you have is the same people singing the same tune and there's no feedback mechanism for truth, that tune can be anything, and that culture produces only falsehoods, right? Or only acts in relationship to like myriad truths.
Well, if there's no reality testing, then you simply can't know what's true and what's false.
And that
And
seems to be
sometimes
what's
I think,
happened, or at least that's what we're arguing for.
hmm, yeah, in a localized context, the problem is in the modern age, it's difficult to do that in isolation. Like earlier back in history, because again, you could have, when you're talking about competence without comprehension, and how you don't necessarily need truth or understanding to make things work. You could have entire cultures that were completely based on ideologies divorced from reality. But if there was no competition from more effective ideologies, it would just keep perpetuating itself anyway. And again, if the ideology is fitness enhancing in the sense of uh, motivating people to live and acquire resources and have children, it doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to be based in reality. It just has to be more survivable than alternative.
So here's a question that I have for you then. What do you think the value is of having amendments to in like a constitution as like statutory or explicit memes that we run our society on?
The value is evolution. Like the Constitution, we treat the Constitution as so. The value in having a stable genetic code is you're less likely to get
Error.
really awful mutations because most mutations kill. 99.9% of genetic mutations are lethal. So you don't want a whole lot of change. You want really, really accurate copying. But you also want the ability to adapt to circumstance.
And you also
Um,
want that code to be a loose, at least if we take memes, right? What we know about memes for anything, we want that information and that structure of information to loosely fit, right?
loosely fit.
The data. Right, so whatever application that it's fitting to, we want it to have a clear grasp of whatever it is that it's covering, but also a liberal grasp in that it doesn't always take under what it covers to be the things that it was defined as covering originally.
Yes, you want it to be adaptive.
You want it to have an
That's
adaptive quality to it, yeah.
that is one of humanity's single most effective traits is adaptability to novel truths. And I mean, because the Constitution, when it was written, it was inherently self-contradictory in promising liberty and equality to all, and being built upon a slave-holding society. And so, when you have blatant contradictions like that, and the founders recognized at the time that was not, it wasn't going to last. Like they knew that the economic system they had in place could not last, and also morally should not last. They also knew that they couldn't build a country that got rid of that immediately. So that was part of the reason for the baked-in adaptability. And then, yeah, the country was able to evolve violently past that, and is still in the process of doing so. And sometimes, because just as evolution, changes aren't always progressive or adaptive; they're just changes. But the advantage of having a stable system like that is that it exists outside of the individual. Whereas when you've got a figurehead like Putin, like Trump wanted to be, any dictator who is the sole focus of it becomes very unpredictable and very prone to making mistakes on whim. And you don't have the common touchstone of, yeah, this is what we can both agree on. These are the rules of this game that we can agree on. You don't have one player of the game telling the other player what the rules are, like a lot of young children try to play.
Or like Trump did when he did any like interview or debate.
Mhm.
He'd constantly shift the field. It was insane. Um, all right, well, at least that's a. I think that's a good overview of like what it is that memes are doing and how they're functioning in our society. Did you want to cover like any of the rebuttals that that Dennis talks about, or did you want to go into the memes themselves that we had?
Oh, either way, I didn't look at the rebuttals too closely. I mean, I had read them previously, but there weren't any in particular.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
could
yeah.
address rebuttals.
I
I
think the
mean, the
most.
most.
Yeah, no, I have a couple of questions that maybe we can talk about. I have a question. Uh, does the exposure of memes to understanding give an advantage or disadvantage, given that memes have done so well reproducing without those who use them knowing that they exist? So what's interesting is that, right, like to me, Richard Dawkins is the first person to explicitly state that there are memes, right? Maybe it came before him. It's very likely that maybe like somebody like um, Frege or somebody like that maybe had a concept of memes um, that he didn't explicitly state, or maybe Turing or some of these other people who were thinking about information beforehand. But it seems like Dawkins kind of just like stumbled upon the meme operating in his
Yeah,
own mind.
he coined the term, and he was the first, as far as we can tell, to explicitly connect it with evolution through natural selection.
Okay.
So
So,
as opposed to just ideas, units of thought, whatever, he was the first to say, "Oh yeah, these are behaving analogously to genetic."
right. Okay.
And yeah,
So, given that we now have some type of some meta perspective on our own understanding of memes, does that produce some type of feedback mechanism on them that you think will either increase or decrease their effectiveness, or I don't know. I just like to think what or love to hear what you have to say about this meta perspective that we have on the memes given their nature and how they've been working.
so how is it useful? Is what I hear you're asking.
I mean, I
How's the
maybe
concept
it's
of
not
me?
you. Maybe not even that. Just like, what do you think the impact is going to be on memes themselves, given that the meme users are now meme understanders?
Oh, so in the sense of understanding genetics giving way to genetic engineering.
Yeah, precisely, right? It seems that, and he talks about this later on, that one becomes masterful um, at at manipulating the aspects of dance. Right? We have these choreographers of these memographers or whatever, these choreographers of dance that take the aspects of the movements that are produced by cultures that dance around fires or whatever, and they string them together into these, into these images like this. Bird watchers be like, no, not yet.
The classic meme format, pictures and text. This is what people generally understand uh, to be a meme when they hear the word.
Right. And maybe this is when we see the beginning of the internet as the beginning of the self-reflective meme manifestation, where one knows that they're producing a meme instead of the meme being the one producing itself.
Hmm.
right? It seems like there is a shift here, right? In that, at least intentionally, humanity, maybe it is the our generation, the millennial generation, that was able to get this sorted out. But it seems that we're the first ones with the ability to share that we're producing memes as memes, right?
One of Dennett's major overarching themes in the book, and Dawkins' themes in all of his book, is bottom up versus top down production. So I think there are a lot of marketing companies who are uh, desperately trying to find the next viral sensation, and they're trying to deliberately and intentionally produce this notion. Oh, this I included this specifically because I wanted to address the trolley problem meme as a specific subset of philosophical meme. Because
They are
trolley problem,
absolutely, absolutely.
yeah, and in this case, it's a very good what's the term? It's a good thought experiment. It's a good vehicle for thought experiments. Like it's a format where you can just stick a bunch of things in and then see how. But to return to what I was talking about, the the notion of inventing a meme that is going to go viral versus having a soup of a whole bunch of different people creating all these things, and then whichever takes off, that's what takes off. It's illustrative, maybe not for positive purposes, but one understanding of memes, one consequence of understanding memes was the Trump administration and the MAGA movement, and ultimately QAnon, using this bottom up, disconnected, both disconnected from a hierarchy and also disconnected from reality process in order to radicalize people and get people on board and spread information. Uh, so the mimeticists, such as it were, again, I don't think there was intention. I think one of the defining features of the Trump campaign in 2016 was its lack of deliberate focus and its lack of expectation. They didn't expect to win. The whole thing was somewhat random and unconscious as a process. Um, so yeah, and I think we'll
Did you want to
continue to
talk
see
about
that.
this trolley meme?
The trolley meme. I mean, that one in particular is an interesting concept. He's talking about a lot of times people blame the algorithm, like, oh, you weren't discriminated against. It was just the algorithm.
Right,
This
right.
this happened because of the algorithm. That happened because of the algorithm. What this is saying is, if you program an algorithm uh, to make a decision as to whether or not to pull the lever in a trolley problem, you're absolved of moral responsibility either way because it was the algorithm that made the decision.
Right.
And obviously, they're being ironic.
Right.
But but it's a useful thing to have in your back pocket in general. Anytime somebody blames an algorithm, algorithms, at least somewhere down the line, have human producers. I don't know if you've got algorithms writing algorithms now. You
Oh,
probably do.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
I have a
but
question for you. Do you think
hmm,
that this specific meme actually illustrates the structure of a meme?
in what sense?
Or at least it illustrates one of the structures of a meme. Well, it seems to be that memes have a common structure. At least the internet meme does. Or maybe I'm wrong about this, but maybe a meme in general seems to have a structure, right? It has a problem. It has the like action or behavior that is the conundrum at hand. Like, do I chip this way on the board? Do I chip the other way on the board? And then it has the meta responsibility, I guess, or the activity that's governing the state of affairs in question. Right? So it seems like there's at least in this one there's two choices. There's myself as an actor, and then there's my relationship to the scene at hand, right? So when I build a boat, it seems like my circumstances are very similar. I can build a boat one way or I can build a boat another way, right? And my decision about how it is that I cut with the chisel or pull the lever is ultimately something that is not necessarily open to me all the time, which is what this trolley problem is designed to expose to people, right? Is their thought process. It seems
I
to
mean,
me that there's something there in telling us about the structure of a meme because this one is so successful and because it does seem to have some pretty identifiable parts that play specific roles.
you could be onto something there. I mean, when you were describing that, I thought to myself that it sounded like narrative structure in general. You've got an actor and you've got a problem, usually a dilemma, and it's oftentimes unresolved. And so, yeah, that could point to a deeper underlying structure, not just of internet memes, but of how human thought tends to work oftentimes in dilemmas or in binaries with a sense of agency. Um, and as an approach to a particular kind of conflict. I don't know. I think you would have to look for counterexamples, memes that don't fit that format.
Well, it seems like there's a lot of memes that don't, right? We can
Yeah.
easily just pick this one here. Um, and eventually it will show up. Right? This
Yeah.
meme doesn't have the same structure. There's no dilemma
Right.
here at all. There's not even an actor.
Well, I mean that meme works in conjunction with the earlier one of paleontologists be like, oh no, too late. So there's the dilemma there in the sense of you've got the chicken, and then over here you've got the Tyrannosaurus, and there's also the actor. The actors could be construed as the paleontologists or the bird watchers.
Or the birds themselves.
Yeah, and it's different. Humor has such an interesting structure by itself, and that was another thing that both Trump and Putin, and I imagine a lot of other wannabe dictators, use to pretty devastating effect. Is humor and irony, both in the sense of being able to say, "Oh, I'm just joking. I'm not kidding." It's part of that further divorcing from reality, but also in that psychological payoff. Um, Good example of humor coming from the other side. And
Like this one.
these are great illustrations of memes because you don't. These are human gestures, and human gestures. Um, I wanted to bring up this because this gesture has used to be okay. Oh, okay. It used to mean affirmation, and that gesture got hijacked and was given a completely different. Um, what's the word in semiotics? Signifier. Yeah, that signifier received a completely different signifier. This gesture used to mean victory, and then it was translated from victory to peace. I think that was more of a unintentional semantic shift. But this one, we don't even have to say what those gestures are intended to represent. First off, those gestures in both instances probably represented something totally different. But in this context, the context, and again, you've got the divergency there. You've got the either or structure, which is common to a lot of memes. And yeah, and given that context, putting them together, the semantic content is really, at least I think it's really obvious. It should be obvious without explanation.
Right.
Um,
I mean, obviously, we can see that Melania doesn't have to think very hard about how big sizes are, whereas Michelle has to think a lot bigger.
uh,
Maybe that
part of
just applies to their IQs. I don't know. Considering I think
well,
Melania was
term
the only one who had virtually no like White House duties or like White House programs that she took on her own. Minus the
Didn't she
cyberbullying
dig?
one.
Yeah, didn't she dig a hole at some point?
Maybe.
I remember a picture of her with a shovel. Uh, was she the one with the "I don't care, do you"?
Yes.
No, I guess that was the role. I don't know. Could be IQ. Could be term limit. Like, regardless.
There's a million reasons.
Yep. This is one of my personal favorites because again, it relies so much on implication and rough familiarity with the meme format. This is another really common meme format: is the progressive progression. I guess I don't know what the word you would use for that, but just yeah, a progressive format where it's building up. And
Where like a higher layer is exposed each in each one. Or at
Mhm.
least the bottom two express the lowest layer, and then the top two express a higher layer, where the highest one is expressing the highest layer, which is absolutely nothing.
Well, in this, I mean, in the because you see it with the Winnie the Pooh meme as well, where at the top it starts off as and he's wearing a suit, and it usually progresses from the top down in the direction we read. But yeah, this starts with the small brain, and then regular brain, lit up brain, and then galaxy brain. It's the sort of thing if you hadn't seen the meme format, you might. But it'd be interesting to show this to somebody who wasn't familiar with the format, see if they could parse it out, fill in the blanks.
I feel like I feel like it's yeah, I don't know, maybe not. But I
Because
feel
it
like it's pretty
almost
obvious. People who don't need text and image, right, is the bottom one. And
mhm.
people who only need image,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's
There's so much implication. It's almost pure structure.
right. Yeah, yeah. The concepts themselves. I mean, it's they reveal themselves deductively with very little
Mhm.
thought or effort. But
Yeah, minimal amount of actual content.
this one you'll have to explain to me because I don't quite understand it. The television with the camera on top of it.
It's a camera on top of it, and it's watching both the TV and the cameras plugged in. It's their source of light. I think of it as a metaphor for meditation.
No. Yeah. Okay.
It's like where's the watching here? You've got to have an external source looking at the screen, but the screen is just looking at what's right behind it. So I don't know. It's really hard to describe why I found this funny, but I this is one of my favorite images, just overall.
I love recursive images. What would be interesting
Yes.
is if there was an image of this on the TV.
Yeah, I mean the recursion is an interesting. You can point a camera at itself and you just get that infinite eagerness. I don't know. There's something. There's some symbolic it watching its power source that you can infer a lot of additional meaning,
Yeah.
especially if it's supposed to be a security camera. I don't know.
It's watching nothing but its own power. Yeah. I mean that's a analogy for government and policing and a whole bunch of stuff.
Life,
Life.
fitness, survival,
And then our final meme,
reproduction.
the monk.
A monk asked, when Vimalkirti held up four worlds, where was he himself? The master said, behind you. The monk said, why would he be behind me? The master said, you put him there. And clearly somebody put a statue of a monk in deep meditation behind him to very
and broke
unfortunate results.
and broke too hard.
Mm,
And there we are.
broke through.
They
And
broke through.
the context for that, Vimalakirti was a layman. The Vimalakirti Sutra is one of the most significant Mahayana sutras. He was reputed for being able to summon bodhisattvas and beings from other realms to speak with and converse with, and showing himself to be wiser than all of them, despite being a lay practitioner as opposed to a monk. His most famous teaching is referred to as Vimalakirti silence, where I believe it was Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva asked various Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to give a teaching and to describe the highest understanding. And when she turned to Vimalakirti, Vimalakirti said nothing. So then this koan goes on. This koan would have been used in China in the Chan tradition. Clearly, a monk is asking about Vimalakirti conceptually. He's trying to get some sort of metaphor of, oh, Vimalakirti's holding up the four worlds. Where is he? Is he in one of them? Is he in none of them? Is he apart? And he's trying to get a philosophical or a theological description of what the meaning of four worlds is. This elucidation, and the master just says, "Oh, he's behind you." And it's like an abbot and Costello. He's like, "What? How'd he get there? Like, you put him there. Why did I put him there? Why would he put him there? He put Vimalakirti behind him. He put Vimalakirti in his head as a concept and missed the point of the teaching."
And that's what's
And
interesting, I think, about Buddhist tradition is that Buddhism is explicitly anti-meme, or maybe not explicitly anti-meme, but at least anti-meme enough, right? Where one realizes that the memes aren't really, well, that they maybe have their own agency, but that there's some other aspect of control that you have. Then maybe we could
did
talk
you
about that more, but I've never really thought
did
about
you
this until just now.
Okay. I mean, certainly in Chan, I would agree. Chan and Zen traditions. I don't know if that can be generalized to Buddhism more broadly, but given that you've studied way more Indian Buddhism than I have, you find a similar sort of
Yeah, this
movement
this
to
idea this idea of like giving no answer is seems that seems very reasonable to me. And
that's present in the Madhyamaka as well.
mm, I don't know. I don't want to speak for them too much, but it
Okay.
it seems like they probably wouldn't have any issues with that. Maybe not.
In
Maybe they
what
would.
was
Maybe they would try to. But I feel like the tradition is full of people, full of these types of stories where everybody's trying to give explanations and the explanation can't be given.
hmm.
Um,
So in that sense, recognizing a false, not falsehood, but relative non-existence.
right. I mean, perhaps that Buddhism is this recognition of memes as such or something. Right.
Well, Buddhism itself as a meme, I mean, it is, for one, huge. Like, Buddhism stretching from across 2,500 years and from India to Southeast Asia, China and Japan and Tibet. A lot of the traditions don't see eye to eye on things.
Right.
I mean, the Diamond Sutra is intensely mimetic in that it tells you at many points in the Diamond Sutra, one is instructed if you memorize a passage from this sutra and repeat it to somebody else, you will achieve more merit than treasure houses filled with treasure in all the worlds and every grain of sand in 36 Ganges rivers. Like they imagine an truly uncountable amount of merit you get from memorizing the Diamond Sutra and then repeating the Diamond Sutra, the teachings to other people. So it is one of the most explicitly mimetic documents out there in that it is saying the instructions within the text itself say, copy me, make copies of me, make as many copies of me as possible, it will benefit you. And incidentally, the Diamond Sutra, one of the oldest printed texts in existence,
Hmm.
possibly the oldest printed book in existence, because it is so vociferous in making it. It wants to be copied. It wants to be copied,
I
and
would
people
say
are
that's probably a more unique type of concept in Buddhism. The wanting to
I
be
don't.
copied, and a
Mhm.
concept wanting to be copied.
Which and what's fascinating is another who says thoughts are not thoughts. That's why we call them thoughts. So you can read a lot of anti-mimetic ideology in there as well as the strictly mimetic in the sense of survival success through replication.
Right, exactly.
Uh, so the interplays, and obviously in both cases, we're being anachronistic in reading memes into like they didn't. I don't know what Dignaga's metaphysics of like thought or ideas or how he approached those were. But
I didn't really cover them. I don't think we really have much of his work related to that. Most of the
okay,
stuff that I worked on with Dignaga was his work on inferences.
hmm.
Um, so I guess like in relationship to him, what I discovered is that he thought that all of our thinking went through this inferential process. All of our valid thoughts at least did. And we had this like we use we used modus ponens and modus tollens to establish the membership of certain properties within other properties that share common features.
Okay,
So the memes, I guess, in his sense, would be that there are these decision procedures that determine truth, or at least the relationality between two concepts as such. And that if we're going to make valid decisions, then we need to have access to both the positive and the negative instances of that.
so more looking at how memes behave and
Mm,
compose each other, or
yeah, yeah, I guess you could say
transition
that.
from
Yeah,
one
it
to
would be
another.
like, it would be, for him, he was interested in, at least, like, he was interested in how words got meaning and how we made inferences about the world around us and how we made, well, valid inferences specifically. Because we want to, I mean, when you're reading scripture or doing introspection on the self, like you need to be able to encounter those different experiences and have a method of establishing their validity.
Selection.
Yeah. So what?
It's a selection process.
Yeah. So it. I mean, for me, what at least in the argument that I gave for Dignaga is that the process is very similar to like establishing a rule, right? So if somebody tells you that like all A cards have sevens on them, right? You need to establish the absence, right? You need to do modus ponens and modus tollens on the cards in order to determine the truth of the rule. So having this double-sided procedure is really important because just establishing that one side of the argument is true, right? Just flipping over an A card and finding a 7 doesn't mean that the rule is true, right? You have to flip over the 3 card and make sure it doesn't have an A on it, or a 2 card and make sure it doesn't have an A on it, right? So it's important that we have these verifying procedures that are internalized at least. I don't think that the Buddhists really thought about memes. Really, they thought more about like how individual concepts produce like different afflictions of suffering and how we can let go of them. But as you said, the tradition has lots of different ways of
Yeah.
encountering people, and that may actually show that it's a good meme. And I mean, obviously, religion itself is a meme, as Dennett points out in the book. And the memes that work, right, the certain ways of proceeding through life in a religious manner seem to work very similar to memes. So
Yep. Definitely worthy of further investigation. I mean, it'd be interesting because you can relate that back to like dependent origination and how various afflictions transmit themselves and come up. The Buddhist treatment of the dharmas, of afflictions and whatnot within the mind from a phenomenological approach could be analogized to memetics. But again, that'd be anachronistic and that would require its own separate set of research and approach. Anywho, I did send, I don't know if how it's probably not feasible to pull it up, but I found another meme that pointed towards structure of memes in general. Um, you'll have to you might get a kick out. You're gonna go see.
where did you send it to me?
Oh, it's I just dropped it into the probably. Oh yeah, so you can't
All right,
pull
let
it
me
that
see.
way.
If we can find it here real quick.
Into the chat. Yeah. Otherwise, I think I mean memetics is a fascinating field that's still kind of under development, and there you go. So this is a good dozen images from various viral memes that are were being tossed around over the past 5 years or so, and that all have a commonality of structure. And I wonder how this relates to the observation you made of the trolley problem, as far as there being so many memes that somebody pointing at another figure and some sort of concept associated with that.
They're all pointing to nothing.
In this instance, well, yeah, because Spider-Man is usually pointing at other Spider-Man, the Pawn Stars guy or Chopper, or
In this
County
case, they're
Chopper.
all pointing at like some type of creation. Their own, like, yeah, I don't know how to read that. It's almost like they're all reflecting on the horror of their own existence. That's kind of
Because the woman,
that's what I get from that.
because the woman is pointing at a cat. Uh, Again,
Spider-Man is
Spider-Man's pointing at himself.
right.
But Leo DiCaprio, I almost said Da Vinci. Leo DiCaprio, he's that meme usually means, "Hey, that's a good idea," or "I see what you did there." Um,
Okay.
whereas the one in the top left is usually more like, "No, you need to give me this" or something. So they're all various gestures, and yeah, that's the question. What are they pointing to? Are they pointing to another meme, a concept, or are they actually pointing towards nothing?
I think that my impression is that they're pointing to the horror of the nothing, like what Heidegger said. Yeah, that's my general vibe on this one. I don't know though. I don't make memes.
No.
I don't
Well,
understand as much as
it's
them.
interesting. Like the horror of the nothing as a concept. There's this. I think it's. I don't know if it's uniquely Western, but it's certainly common in Western thought to equate emptiness with horror or terror,
Yeah, and I'm
as
not sure
opposed
if
to
that's
equating.
Heidegger's fault or not, but
I think it goes at least Schopenhauer.
Okay, fair enough.
At least. You
Fair
could
enough.
probably go further back.
Yeah.
It's
And then
probably Plato's
it's
fault.
there's in literature too. You see like the unknown being scary, and
Mm.
whereas even in like ancient Japanese art, they embrace the emptiness. So just very different ways that memes have operated. I was thinking about this as well in like the Japanese architecture, Japanese and Chinese architecture versus Western architecture. The no screw, no bolt methodologies versus the screw and bolt methodologies that the West has developed. It's very interesting to see how just different cultural things manifest and then
Mm.
grow, right? Just and how Japanese woodworking is so much about tightness and proper fit and seamlessness and all these different things that we completely abandon in Western furniture and architecture. It's very sloppy, pragmatic, does it fit together type stuff. Well, that's the podcast for this Monday, unless you have anything else to say.
Nope, that sounds good. Thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure, everyone. If you're watching on Twitch or later watching on YouTube, we hope you enjoyed it. And we'll be back this coming Friday. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.